All right, so we're going to talk about the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 lasted from 1812 to 1814, although the Battle of New Orleans occurred in 1815 because back then they didn't have CNN News or anything, so they didn't know that the war, which ended, the War of 1812, which ended with the Treaty of Ghent, actually ended in December of 1814. Now, who won the war and who was it between? Well, let's do the second question first. Who was it between? It was between the United States versus Great Britain. So they're at war again. Now, who won? Well, in terms of um, militarily, well, I don't want to say that. Um, I guess you could say it was sort of a tie. The British won more battles, and even burned down the White House. Now, what was the war about? And we're just, obviously we're behind. I got behind a few weeks, but I do want to get through some material here. Um, well, more than anything else, it was the British impressment of American soldiers. Okay. You know what? Let's not put American soldiers. Let's just say the British impressment of Americans. Now, when we say impressment, what that basically meant was that you were forced, and the British did this all over the world. You were forced to serve in the British Navy. Now, if you ask, well, how can Americans be forced by the British to serve in the British Navy? And that would be an excellent question. And of course, that's why there was a war. There were other reasons. Some people argue there were war hawks that wanted to go to war in order to try to take control of parts of Canada, that type of thing. But I think overall, British impressment was the main reason. How did this work? The British were um, had really kind of the British Navy had kind of a lack of manpower due to their wars with France. And the purpose of the impressment was to catch British sailors who had gone AWOL. Uh, British sailors hated that life. It was a hellish life. It was hell being a British sailor. It was not fun at all. And you basically, they had very hard labor, beatings. I don't know if you ever saw that T-shirt. The beatings will continue until morale improves. It's kind of the way it was. Very low wages, and of course, you were always worried about your life. Your life was always in danger. Now, many of them would go AWOL, absent without leave, and work on American commercial vessels. But this was not. This was not. Wasn't like not everybody. In fact, very few of the people that worked on American commercial vessels were from the British Navy. But the British would use this as an excuse and stop these British vessels and board them and like basically kidnap Americans. And the British would say, no, they were they went AWOL, which of course was completely ridiculous. As a result, it is estimated that, if I can remember the numbers, but the British impressed around like 6,000 American citizens. Now, imagine if that were to happen today. Of course, you would think, yeah, of course, we're going to go to war. And that's what happened back then, the War of 1812. Now, what's the big deal about the Battle of New Orleans? Well, the war was over with the Treaty of Ghent. No one really won. It was just kind of like they just pretty much decided to stop fighting. But in 1815, there was the Battle of New Orleans. And since we are in Louisiana, we're going to talk about it a little bit. In fact, where you may have gone to Jackson Square before. And there's a statue of Andrew Jackson, who led in the defense of New Orleans. Well, oops. In December of 1814, a British commander by the name of Edwin Pakenham arrived to NOLA, New Orleans. Had about 7,500 British veterans with him. Pakenham was the brother-in-law of the Duke of Wellington, who had refused the New Orleans assignment. Else things might have been very different both at New Orleans and Waterloo. It was Wellington that defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Anyway, Pakenham surprised Jackson. Jackson was expecting Pakenham to ascend the Mississippi River and approach New Orleans from the south. Instead, Pakenham sailed through Lake Borgne and Pontchartrain and emerged on the Mississippi behind Jackson to the north of the city. But Pakenham was painfully cautious, and he wanted to wait for every piece of artillery to pass through the lakes and everything, which nullified his surprise. And actually, I took a military strategy class one time, and we studied a lot of Clausewitz, a famous German military strategist, and he was very much kind of sort of against this idea of surprise. I mean, his thing was to make sure you have, just get everything in order and then attack. That surprises usually mean that's a little bit more of a complex plan, and the more complex a plan is, the worse it's going to be, because in war, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. All right, and I didn't really agree with the professor when he said that. Y'all can let me know what you think. Send me an email or something. And I don't do anything. I just pretty much read and write and watch C-SPAN over here. I thought that was kind of interesting. And the more I studied during that class, the more I realized that the professor was right. I mean, and you can find a lot of examples. Well, Pakenham's delay granted Jackson the time necessary to throw up earthworks and cotton bales and things like that to secure his position on the river outside of New Orleans. And contemptuous of Jackson's motley army of, he basically had 7,000 men made up of Creoles, Acadians, free blacks, pirates, Tennessee and Kentucky frontiersmen, Indians, pretty much all the people that you would see in a honky tonk in Allen Parish. All right. Anyway, the defensive positions usually they have a big advantage. All right. And Pakenham foolishly attacked the position on January 8th, 1815. Despite thousands of years of experience, the military mind, it seems, has yet to learn that a frontal assault against a defensive position is not a good idea, but people continue doing this well into the 20th century, World War I. The myth is that the British troops at New Orleans were annihilated by the Tennessee and Kentucky riflemen, but really the greatest impact was made by the lethal fire of the artillerymen. 2,000 British soldiers were slaughtered, including Pakenham himself. 2,000 killed. Pakenham also died, as I said, and his body was pickled in a barrel of rum and was returned to his wife aboard a ship in the Gulf. Now, some historians have claimed that the Battle of New Orleans had no consequence. This is not true. Sure, the Treaty of Ghent had ended the War of 1812. But Jackson's victory was important for several reasons. Number one, it secured the terms of the treaty. In other words, if the British had won, they may have just gone ahead and said, we're not going to pay any attention to this treaty, and we're just going to take control of New Orleans. And New Orleans would not be what it is today. Second, the victory converted the obscure Jackson into a national hero, and he would later become the President of the United States. Number three, and this is very important, the victory instilled a strong sense of nationalism, of unity in the United States, to the point to where from 1815 to 1920, people called this the era of good feelings. But things would quickly go south, and in 1861 to 1865, the United States would be embroiled in a civil war. And we will talk a little bit about that in the next few lectures.